Psalm 1, verse 1. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. David had his fair share of trouble in his life, and much of it due to his own choices. When we look back on the life of David, we see a man who was devoted to God, specifically the expansion of God's kingdom, peace for God's people, and a man who was considered to be a man after God's own heart. But David didn't always make the best choices. We see David's willful choices leading him down destructive paths and to destinations that held tremendous consequences, not just for him, but for all of those who were around him as well, and for those whom he loved. When looking at David's life, we are tempted to ask ourselves, how can David do such things, and what led him to these decisions? We can easily ask ourselves these questions as well. And this is something that Psalm 1 verse 1 truly shows us that we must turn our attention to. Do we ask ourselves if there is anything in our lives that could be hindering God's blessings or happiness or joy from saturating every aspect of our lives? David, after much experience, his fair share of sin, betrayal of God and those he loves, and reaping the consequences of those actions, he shares his exhortation with you and me today. Do not choose the wrong path. And do not choose the wrong path today, which is oftentimes so easy for us as humans to do. You see, here we see in this verse, there are 3 actions to avoid. Each action, walking in counsel, standing in a path, and sitting in a seat, takes the engagement of our will in order to effect the inevitable action that follows the commitment of our will. It is important to note that walking in counsel is not wrong in and of itself. Standing in a path is not wrong in and of itself. And sitting in a seat is not wrong in and of itself. But with the inclusion of the words wicked, sinners, and scoffers, we see a directional movement of human will that is to be rejected and avoided in our lives. Wickedness is a willful animosity towards God that seeks to destroy all that God stands for and loves. Sinners, and more specifically the path of sinners, represents the sinful choices humanity makes that leads them away from God's desires and into their own destruction. It is the commerce of sin, so to speak. And scoffers represent those whose spiritual state have been given over to a cynicism and intellectual hostility towards God. Scoffers have an internal mockery that shrouds their soul in bitterness and hate for all things that pertain to God. Therefore, the psalmist indicates that our will must be oriented away from such destructive choices in our lives and exhorts us to choose our actions wisely. Just as much as we ask our Father in heaven to sanctify our hearts and minds, we must also ask for the renovation, the transformation, and sanctification of our will in order to effect righteous action in our lives. One of the underlying principles dwelling between each word in this beautiful verse is that we are the ones who choose which paths we take and which paths we avoid. I remember when I was a boy and I was hiking in the forests of Mount Pinos in California. I loved to walk around the mountains, take in the fresh air, and challenge myself to go further and deeper into the woods. And one day I remember walking along a mountain path and reaching a fork in the road. And I remember thinking to myself, this path looks dark, unfamiliar, dangerous, and is probably a path I should avoid. Nonetheless, I took the path anyway. And as the once visible path began to slowly disappear into the pine needles without my notice, I eventually looked down at the ground and realized that I had lost the right path and did not know where I was. Suffice it to say that it would be hours in the cold dark of the mountains before I finally found my way onto a road that led me back to safety. Often in our lives, not taking a path can be the difference between blessedness and joy or misery and pain. And the psalmist knew this very well. And we must always choose to remember that our will must be engaged toward what is right and to choose not to walk on paths that lead us to being lost. The psalmist encourages us all today to understand that there is joy and happiness to be found in rejecting the counsel of the wicked and instead walking in the full counsel of God. There is joy and happiness to be found in rejecting the path of sinners and instead walking on the narrow path of righteousness in our lives. There is joy and happiness to be found in rejecting sitting in the seat of scoffers and instead praising and worshiping the presence and works of God in our hearts and lives. Psalm 1 verse 1 is not only about the engagement of our will in the process of choosing the right paths and rejecting negatively impactful paths, but also about the company we keep and the influence of those outside forces in our relationships upon our decisions and choices. Psalm 1 verse 1 is just as much a warning as well as an encouragement that we can live a blessed life. Have you walked in the counsel of the wicked? Have you stood in the path of sinners? Have you scoffed at the life and works of God and His people? Do you see things in your life that need to change? The psalmist invites you today to turn away from those things and to look inside yourself and repent of any willful action that is harming your life. Do you feel the Lord's presence pressing upon your heart even now to make the right choice, good choices, and decisions that move you toward a right relationship with God, towards a commitment to the transformation of the world around you, and to be committed to your own spiritual and physical health? Then there's no better time than right now. The Lord stands at the door of your heart, and the Lord stands with you right now at your fork in the road. Do not choose the wrong path today, but instead choose the right path today. God bless you.